Hello, we are Coping Life Talk. I'm Lydia Istomina, and today our guest is Staci Backauskas. Hello, Staci.
Hi, how are you?
We are Coping Life Talk, and our regular co-hosts are Candy Sheehan and Scott Kiddle. So, hello. Good to have everybody here with us today. So, quickly, we started 2 years ago, and our program picked up very quickly during COVID time because people had lots of issues with coping. And that's how the name of our podcast was shaped, Coping Life Talk. So I appreciate Candy and Scott so much because we went through ups and downs, and gradually we discovered our audience. We discovered people who truly need new coping skills, because we've learned ourselves that you are not born with coping skills. You constantly need to work on them and develop. And that's how we came with this idea to invite different guests who have their interest and professional skills in various coping areas. So, Staci, we are so happy to have you today. And hosting you from Pennsylvania is again a good illustration of our podcast because we have guests from all over the world. And it makes us so excited. We grow with our guests. So, Staci, please introduce yourself.
Well, I consider myself to be a super smart, highly sensitive creative with a touch of trauma. And my path at this point in my life is to share what I have learned on a 30-plus year journey so that everyone can live their destiny and not their fate.
And later in our podcast, Staci, you will be sharing two important subtopics: reconnecting to your authentic self, taking baby steps, and also the second will be there is nothing wrong with you. Let's begin with, first of all, introduce us overall your topic, and then why did you even become interested in that particular aspect of coping?
Well, what I discovered for myself is no matter what advice I followed from the gurus around self-care and what was necessary in order to immerse myself in good self-care, I just didn't feel like I was making any progress. Mm-hmm. And, that leads into what we're going to talk about in a little bit in terms of the question, because we're all human beings with egos, and it was disturbing to me. And what I will say is at this stage of my life, because I'm going to be 59 next month, I didn't grow up with the word trauma in the mainstream vernacular. They were still calling it shell shock, right? Yeah. When I was a kid. There wasn't even the term PTSD. That had not even been coined when I was a kid. So, I had to work through my anger and resentment about that, quite honestly, about there not being the information and the innovators that we have today on this subject. Mm-hmm. There just was no information. So it really left me feeling like there's something wrong with me. Why can't I get this? Why, I'm not stupid, so why can't I figure this out? Yeah. And as the world of mental health and the topic, particularly of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what is created a lot of times from experiencing early trauma, really began to hit into more mainstream areas, social media, for example. You can find a ton of Instagram people and TikTok people. There's even like trauma talk on TikTok where people speak about early childhood experiences in this area. And as I began to study it, and I started, I've been a writer, professional writer for 20-some years, so research is my jam. I took deep dives into different things that people were writing and advocating for, and really taught myself that there is nothing wrong with me. I just didn't have the tools or the ability really to learn because there was nothing out there to teach me. Mm-hmm. And the more I studied that and the more I was able to accept that, the more the blocks about good self-care started showing themselves to me. Because, we all love a good massage or a manicure or a pedicure, but there's a lot more to self-care than that. And self-care can often look like making a really difficult decision. Self-care looks like, what? I need to make that mammogram appointment even though I really don't want to. Or I need to go to the doctor about this particular issue even though I'm terrified. That's still self-care.
Okay. Can I ask a question, Staci? Because I'm someone I know who had early trauma, really has never dealt with it, I don't think. They keep reliving it over and over. It's a cycle they can't seem to get out of. Are you going to talk about that, to tell someone if they're in that spot, how they move on or what they do to get past that? Because I see that as being something that is really holding them back.
Well, the first thing is you have to want to. Something the ego might consider a benefit to reliving that, because it can give you attention. It can give you concern and what the ego might interpret as comfort or validation of some kind. I once knew someone who used to say, she was a Gestalt therapist, and she used to say, everybody's so concerned about drugs and alcohol being an addiction problem in the United States. The biggest problem is not addiction to drugs or alcohol, it's addiction to being a victim.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And she was on the money. And that was like 15 years ago that was said to me. And I haven't spoken to her in over a decade, but I've never forgotten that. Because being a victim comes with privileges. And people don't want to be honest about that. But my thing is, I'm going to talk about all the things nobody wants to talk about. Because at the end of the day, your only and forever best friend is the mirror. Period. And if you can't own, yes, I had this experience in my childhood. Now I'm X age, and I am experiencing behaviors that I don't like. What can I do to change them? Instead of living in a past where you just repeat the pain and the suffering and all the attention that brings you. And you can be honest about that, which is painful. I'm not trying to make light of it. Okay. It's not a picnic by any stretch of the imagination, but that's a pretty long answer to your question, Candy, in that, first of all, you have to really want it. And if you do, there are a kabillion resources out there. I've got.
Could I follow up with one question then?
Sure.
Would you ever say to someone, you need to own this trauma that you had and then work to get past it? Or would that be the wrong thing? Do you ever approach someone who's stuck in that? Don't.
You know what? If I were working with someone as like on a coach kind of basis, because I am not a licensed mental health professional, I joke that I could probably clap out of a lot of the credits if I ever decided to go back to graduate school, but I don't have a license. From my own experience, I would be using my intuition as to what I felt that person could handle. Because sometimes a velvet glove is what's needed, and sometimes a slap upside the back of the head is what's needed.
Okay.
We all know what the difference is in that. And I think, the universe does too. If you really want something and yet your ego is so resistant to doing what's necessary in order to get that, the universe is going to lay some stuff in your path that's going to help you fulfill your intention. And it's always better when you make the choice. That's all I can say. Because if you let the universe, God, whatever language you're comfortable with, do it, it's not going to be pretty. It's not. It's going to be big, and it's going to be ugly, and it's going to be painful. Because unfortunately, human beings are a lot more motivated to change from pain than they are to experience joy. That's just how it is.
Very interesting. So, Staci, I'm looking at your website when we first started talking about this podcast, and I checked your website, and I found this, and that's what we have it on the screen, that you're a storyteller, which is absolutely comes right from the screen. Yes, you are, and definitely an educator, soul excavator. So, is it what you're talking about when you are facing at the end of the day your own reflection in a mirror. This is the only time when you're by yourself. And then at the same time, you said, it's not addiction to alcohol or drugs, but addiction to being a victim and continually doing that because it comes with privileges. Is it where your soul excavation gift comes up? So it's like helping a person when you coach a person, right? To see that, you have to be honest with yourself. You are pushing the wrong need in your being, because being a victim, yes, it is very addictive, and we know how many people we met in our life who they do not admit it. So how do you help a person who has addiction of being a victim to suddenly see that?
I ask questions.
Okay, how? For example.
Okay, so let me think of something. So if I was talking to somebody and they were complaining about something, I would ask a what if question. So if someone's complaining to me about their job and how miserable they are in their job, well, what would it look like if you were in a situation where you were appreciated? How would that feel to you? And I'll tell you, a lot of people can't answer that. I mean, most people, let's just be honest, most people are not interested in excavation. They would rather just kvetch and complain,
Yeah.
And surround themselves with people who will validate their complaints and, their victimhood. Because I have an interesting story. So I had gotten out of a toxic relationship for the third time. Okay? I went back twice. Okay? So after the third time, I was living in Florida, and I'm driving across the bridge between St. Petersburg and Clearwater, and I'm like, good Lord, have mercy, Staci. What the hell? What made you go back again? And in my head, I heard an addiction to victimhood. And I'm like, after all the work I've done, that's not true. My ego was all about defending myself in that moment. And within a day or two, I had some word pairs about what your life looks like when your true self is driving the bus, and what it looks like when your ego or your self that has absorbed all of the beliefs and perceptions that were around you as you were a child, what life looks like when that happens. And so, long story short, I ended up making a deck of cards because I said, okay, Spirit, show me what this is. And it was a card deck, not a book. So I did a little test. I printed up some stuff. I laminated it. Like, let me test it with some people and see what they think. So I was using the terms ego. I was using the terms beneficiary, because to me, that is the true opposite of victim. If you know you're the beneficiary of everything that God, the universe, has to offer you, you cannot possibly sit in victimhood for very long. So the cards were beneficiary and victim. Every single one of the 10 to 12 people that I sat with at a table in a coffee shop and ran these cards by was like, I'm not a victim. I'm like, really, Sally Jane? Because you're in a marriage that all you do is complain about, Or, okay, Greg, how about that job you tell me you hate all the time? So I realized people didn't want to label themselves a victim. They had a real resistance to that. And my mother actually is the one who said, when I told her what had happened, she's like, really, it's just your ego. And so that's what I ended up using, was ego and self with a capital S, because people didn't understand the beneficiary thing, and I wasn't going to be there to explain it to them. But my point in bringing it up is the resistance that people have to identifying as a victim. To them, a victim is someone who gets mugged on the street, somebody who gets fired unjustly, somebody whose spouse cheats on them. That's what people consider to be a victim. They don't understand all the nuances of how they create their own victimhood. And so, as someone who likes to think of herself as a linguist, I'm very conscious about how words sit in people and whether or not they feel connected to them, because whatever I'm trying to communicate is not going to get through if people don't connect with the words I'm using. And so it really is just about asking the questions and finding language. If I'm working with someone, because I have friends who are everything from consider themselves members of Wicca to evangelical Christians, and I adapt my language for where they're standing without judgment. And to me, that's the key to getting through to someone, to being able to help them see where they may be stuck living in the victimhood, is to communicate with them in language that they understand, that works for them.
Okay, that's very helpful. And also, since you mentioned in the very beginning that how different it is for people who had an early trauma, I want to show kind of your website. Could you help us connect it? How different it is if a person has a victim mentality? Is it because a person has a certain predisposition or learned that it is beneficial because you get attention, you even get help, people are all around you, you feel more loved, or for people who had an early trauma, is it any different? So let's see how you can maybe help us to go through your facts. What it says on your website, and it's not showing here or the very thing, the whole thing, but I think what it says, fact, if you experienced early trauma, you are wired differently. Taking exquisite care of yourself requires more than a yoga class or an occasional massage. This is what you said in the beginning. So could you spend a little more time, and what does it mean you're wired differently?
Well, there has been research done that proves that early trauma changes the brain. There are people like Besser van der Kolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which has helped us understand that cognitive behavioral therapy is not the be-all, end-all solution, nor is dialectical behavioral therapy if you have experienced early trauma, because that experience, and it's more than the experience, it's how you respond to it. Because if you experience early trauma, it kicks in your fight or flight, it changes your nervous system, and therefore, with the nervous system being changed, it changes how you process information. So one of the most valuable things I have ever come across is a Venn diagram that was done by a social worker therapist named Cecile Tucker. And so the two big circles are safety and belonging. Because that's, loosely based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The two primary needs for any human being are to feel safe and to feel as if we belong. There's a third smaller circle that overlaps, which is our true identity. And when you feel like you are not safe or that you don't belong from bringing your true identity to the party, you begin to create a false identity that completely overrides your true identity. Because more important than anything else is feeling safe and feeling as if you belong. And so your true identity gets shoved off to the side. The longer you go, to your point, Candy, about someone who experienced early trauma and now as an adult is just perpetuating things, it's hard. I don't even know that I could, I get the visual that just came to me as a football field. You're at one end zone as a kid, and the more years go by without resolving it, you just keep pushing the marker 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards down the football field, and that's all the distance you got to come back to who you were before that happened. And that is a lot of work. I have spent tens of thousands of hours, that's not even an exaggeration, over 30 some years, doing my best to understand who I really am, as opposed to all of the things I came to believe about myself because of what I experienced. And, then you also have the macrocosm of society and culture, that just really cover that up. That's why I call myself a soul excavator. because you are going into the mine shaft, and you better have a pickaxe and a hat with a flashlight on it, because it gets dark sometimes, and to have a support. I will stress this: you need support. And if you've experienced early trauma, I think it is not uncommon to feel like you're an island and you don't need the help. That's one of your survival mechanisms. And that's why self-care is at the center of this, because you can't really create an intimate level support system unless you've learned how to trust yourself first. And if you've had early trauma, whatever the range, from, what they would label as emotional neglect, or just as, not having your emotional needs met, all the way up to sexual assault and other more serious physical issues, you are going to have to reconnect to who you were before that happened, in order for you to be able to understand who you really are. And that all that other stuff is just BS, that although it has served a purpose and was the best way that you knew how to survive, that there are other ways.
So it's still about survival, correct? Kind of, you just lead a person to survival. Okay, I will go back to that statement that you just made. Scott has a question.
But you're talking about the tools to take with you down the mine shaft, the flashlight on the helmet and the pickaxe, and I can't help but think that when you go down the mine of your emotions, your history, your past, I wonder if maybe you also need a canary.
Well, you do. And to me, the canary, I have so many tools in my tool belt, and different things work for different circumstances. But it's a matter of being willing to go exploring. The emotional freedom technique. I don't know if you guys are familiar with EFT tapping. That was developed in 1985 by a guy named Gary Craig, whose work came on the backs of a lot of researchers around acupressure points. But he was the first person to put a verbal script with it. Okay? And it calms you. You tap on various acupressure points as you're speaking to yourself about whatever the situation is. That works for me brilliantly. I have friends for whom that doesn't work at all. There's havening, which is really just a kind self-touch that starts with this kind of stroking. There is 4-7-8 breathing, where you inhale for a count of 4, hold it for 7 seconds, exhale for a count of 8. And those are just 3 that are the tip of the iceberg of what I have in my toolkit. You have to be willing to explore it and to find what works for you, because nothing is a one-size-fits-all solution or next step. And what may work beautifully for me may not have any impact on you at all, Scott. But those are the canaries, to me. Those are the things that, when the canary doesn't come back and you're like, oh, holy crap, it's dark in here. My battery's fizzing. What am I going to do? That you've got the wherewithal. I also am an advocate for therapy. I am an advocate for somatic energy release. Because Besser van der Kolk, who is unquestionably one of the major leaders in the field of trauma recovery, again, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, has talked about how your body remembers that. Like, they use the word trigger a lot now. And again, as a linguist, I'm very conscious about when a word becomes hackneyed, because now it's not landing as hard if you've heard it a million times, right? So I prefer the term reactivate something in your nervous system. And, the same way a tire or a car backfiring would, quote, trigger somebody who had been at war, because it reminded their nervous system of gunfire in some way. There are a million little things. If you've experienced early trauma, and I will say the more nuanced the trauma, the more nuanced the things that will reactivate those things.
Sure.
So it is You have to be willing to be an excavator. You have to be willing to do that work and be aware for your own self. And the other thing I'll say is that you have to understand that when you start to take really good care of yourself, there are going to be people who are not going to be happy.
Oh, yeah.
Because their relationship with you has depended upon you having no boundaries, has a foundation of you doing what they need when they need it, perhaps, or a variety of other things. And, I don't ever want to talk about this in fact of, well, if you just do this work, it's going to be unicorn glitter and ice cream cones, and it's not. You're going to have moments of that, and you'll have more moments of that the longer you work at this. But there are going to be changes you're going to have to navigate, because there are going to be people in your life who are not going to be happy about it.
Yeah. I have a question to you, Stacy. Working as a soul excavator requires lots of your nervous energy to be spent. Also requires certain skills as a professional, but also it comes with the negative effect of a secondary trauma. Because since you work with people who have experienced the trauma, and then as a health professional, mental health professional, you work with these people, you hear about rape, you hear about abuse, and then you absorb it all. And then in the end, people who are in this profession, they experience secondary trauma. And so do you have a tool that protects you, that you can recommend people like even us, because we are in the same profession, that can protect people who work with those patients or clients who experience trauma, to first of all to have a core, sort of spiritual core or emotional core that protects them? So how does it work in your case?
Well, in my case, I would say the first thing is the work that I've done on me allows me the centered groundedness a lot of the time not to absorb that. I mean, there are people who would label me an empath. I choose not to use that word, because my empathic traits, I think, come a lot from hypervigilance, which is a common trait with early trauma. And so I don't use that word. I'm a highly sensitive person. Like, I check all the boxes on the quiz about being a highly sensitive person. But I don't use the word empath for myself. But I use some of the techniques that people who consider themselves to be empaths use. And whether that's grounding or shielding or using that white light before I know I'm going to have a conversation. If something happens and I haven't done those things, or it didn't work for whatever reason, or somehow something leaked in, because that happens, right? I use the techniques that I've used for my own traumatic things. The EFT, the deep breathing, the stimulation of the vagus nerve, which medical research now, I mean, you even see doctors posting on social media about the importance of vagus nerve toning. I mean, I'd have never taken that bet, if I'm honest, that you would see Western medicine getting on board with something like that. But the vagus nerve runs from the bottom of your skull to the bottom of your spinal cord. It's the biggest nerve in your whole body. And it is the key, because it is what controls your parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
Which you need to relax, which you need to digest your food properly, which you need to sleep well. And when it's on constant high alert, none of that stuff's getting done optimally, And so the medical community is starting to understand that. So all of the tools that you've used for your own experiences can be used if you have that secondary trauma. I mean, to be honest with you, right now I am developing curriculum and writing books, and I don't know how a personal coaching thing would unfold for me, because it takes a lot out of me to work with somebody one-on-one. It really does. And I've had to get honest with myself about how I can use the knowledge and the skills that I've acquired over 30 some years on this path in a way that honors me and is integrity with myself. People, I will guide you, but you can lead a horse to water, that old saying. But if someone isn't willing to do the work themselves and interested in doing the work themselves, then, I'm wasting my time.
Okay, so that does it mean that the patient, you sense it, that the patient is capable of helping himself or herself, and then you just say, okay, my work is done here. Is it how it works now?
No, I wouldn't really go that far. I do my best to take exquisite care of the people who come to me. Like I just did the workshop last week on Escape the Trauma Trap Self-Care Edition, which is what you showed. And I followed up with everybody to see how they are, because reverb is real, and when you are introduced, there's actually, I'm trying to think of, it was a Unity person. I want to say Frances Wilshire is the one who coined this term, and oh my goodness, I wish I'll remember it at some point. But basically what she says is, when you introduce truth to long-held error thinking, you better buckle your seatbelt, because it's going to happen, and you're going to get that reverb. You're going to get the ego going, oh my God, what is happening? I feel threatened. And all kinds of things could show up in terms of the voices we all hear in our heads about experiences and beliefs and those kinds of things. So I always check in with people. I always recommend, if you've got something going on, find a therapist. I have the 7 questions I would always ask a therapist before scheduling an appointment PDF on my website. Go there, download it for free. Because you can't just run the risk of finding someone who takes your insurance and crossing your fingers and toes. That's insane to me that you would do that. So you need to suss out for yourself. Build on what I've created. Don't let me be the be-all, end-all authority.
Good, yeah.
You're the authority of your life.
Okay.
Take what I've done and see if there are other things that come to you to ask. But get professional help. I have no interest in being a therapist. I really don't. I have blessed the therapists in my life that have helped me on this journey, and I am deeply appreciative of them. That is not a job I want. I'm not...
So you're not a therapist, you are the soul excavator. Does not mean that you're a therapist, but you are coach. Is it a better word?
Yeah, I don't like that word either. I'm just me. And if you want to figure out who you really are, I can give you some tips and pointers. I am a huge Caroline Myss fan. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Yeah.
But I adore her and credit her with actually saving my life at one point.
Oh, wow.
She's got an audio recording on St. John of the Cross and the Dark Night of the Soul, which literally kept me from killing myself. That's not hyperbole.
Yeah.
So I have an enormous affection for her. But in The Anatomy of Spirit, she talks about how in our society, we bond from our wounds, as opposed to where we're going in our growth and our healing. That when we meet somebody, the first thing we bond over is having that creepy uncle, is having that narcissistic parent, is having that addicted child. Whatever it is, we bond from our wounds. Instead of saying, this is how I've learned to deal with this. Mm-hmm. This is how I've learned to navigate. This is what has made my life brighter. This is what has brought joy into my life. And, it goes back to what I said earlier in that, we get, as human beings, we're much more motivated by pain.
Yes.
Than we are joy. That's just the reality of it. And so what I've learned to do is say, you know what? When I have an experience that brings up a lesson I thought I'd done and put in the books, you know what? I'm going to feel every molecule of this pain because I want it to anchor in me so it never happens again.
One other question. I'll see if it scrolls across to...
Okay, I think their power went out before she got a chance to change that. So, all right. So, to answer the question about how do you reconnect to your authentic self with baby steps?
Yes.
What About Bob is one of my all-time favorite movies, and if you've never seen it, I
Yes.
highly recommend it.
Okay.
Bill Murray, Richard Dreyfuss, it's fabulous. And in it, Richard Dreyfuss plays a psychiatrist who's written a book about baby steps. And of course, it's satire in a lot of ways, but there's, satire comes from truth.
Right.
Or it wouldn't be funny. The truer something is, the more funny it is.
Right.
So I use the baby steps line all the time because, I think as human beings, when we realize that we're one place and we want to get someplace else, we just want to take that mother may I take a giant step leap and get there. And we want to avoid all the steps in between. And the key to life is consistent baby steps.
Right.
No matter what you're talking about. If you are on a self-discovery journey, if you are on a getting fit journey, if you are on an educational journey, it is all about consistent baby steps. And I want to make a distinction here because I think a lot of people conflate consistent with constant. And that is not the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Constant is when you're doing it every minute of every day. Mm-hmm. Consistent is when you're doing it a couple of times a week for 6 months. Mm-hmm. That's consistent. You're going to see noticeable change doing something consistently. The problem is the ego isn't seeing the goal fulfilled. Mm-hmm. It's not seeing the result of what you want to see ultimately. But that's one of the reasons I don't really have goals anymore.
Oh, okay.
My goal is to be in the flow. That's my goal. Yeah. And as long as I am, and let me tell you, I left my corporate job 20-some years ago. It has taken me that long to undo all of the BS in terms of beliefs and structure and everything else. To get to a point where I'm like, that is my only goal, is to be in the flow. It is when I hear my intuition, the voice of spirit, the universe, God. It's when I hear that which is greater than I am, is when I'm in the moment and in the flow. That's my only goal. That is the barometer through which I judge everything now.
I think that's so interesting to me. So let's say you're doing this, you're doing the baby steps. There will be days when maybe you feel like you've taken a giant step backward. How do you deal with setbacks like that when you're trying to move forward, taking these baby steps consistently?
Kindness.
All right. I think that leads us to our other question, because we were going to talk about how to treat yourself with kindness. What does that look like?
Well, it looks different for everybody. And one of the things I do, and I'm going to put a shameless plug in here for this 10-minute self-care journal that I've created, that actually started with a suggestion from a therapist. Because I said, I'm so sick of journaling.
Oh, yeah.
Like the 20 pages of angst and, dream interpretation. I'm tired of it after all these years.
Sure.
And she's like, well, why don't you just do a quick check-in with yourself every morning? And I was like, So I started doing that, and then I started doing more and developed it into a system. And doing that for the 6 months has allowed me to be more aware of what I need. Mm-hmm. When I ask myself, what do I need today emotionally? What do I need today? Sometimes it's validation. So I'll put something on my Google Calendar, remind yourself that you rock. Remind yourself that you're killing this. Sometimes it's acceptance of where I am, because, the only reason for suffering it, I'm 99% sure this is a Buddhist tenet, is that you don't accept reality. You want reality to be different. That's what's causing suffering. It's not the thing that's happening. It's your resistance to accepting that it's happening that is causing your suffering.
Right.
So how can I find a way to be in this moment? How can I listen to the birds chirp? Did you know that birds do not chirp when there's danger? So when birds chirp, it's safe.
Oh, very good.
That also calms your nervous system and stimulates your vagus nerve. There are so many different things out there that will do that. So it's about being able to know yourself well enough to understand when you're feeling icky. Where do you feel that in your body? You know, I feel it right around my throat. It literally feels like somebody's going to strangle me.
Wow.
Other people feel it in their bellies. They get back pain. They get a headache. They feel it somewhere else. Maybe they get a pain in their elbow when something's out of line. But you're the only one that can figure out what that means for you. I can't do that.
Right.
I wouldn't do it even if I could, because that deprives you of the light bulb going off. And that's what anchors it, is having that light bulb moment, to use a cliche, of recognizing that huge revelation. Oh, well, you know what? When I don't feel safe, my stomach gets all funky. That's huge to recognize that.
Do you know, I think that really is, what I hear you say is that people really do have to take some responsibility in this process. You can't let someone else, it's not a passive thing, it's a very active thing. And I think that's where some people get kind of hung up, that it's hard work, and that's not an easy thing to tackle. That would be very difficult. Did you ever have anyone tell you, though, oh, you're just making, when you're trying to be kind to themselves, do you ever have anyone tell you, you're just making excuses for yourself, you're just letting yourself off the hook?
Everybody's got to figure out what that is for themselves. I mean, most therapists will tell you that it will be the ages that you experienced major trauma that got frozen at that age emotional. When you've got all of those aspects jockeying for position to make the decisions, it's very uncomfortable.
Sure. Right. Okay. Another thing that you mentioned that I'm kind of curious about, you tell people that they need to live their destiny. And must be a very long journey of discovery also. How do people do that? How do you find, what is your destiny? How do you know?
Well, to me, your destiny is living authentically as who you are, no matter who else is in the room. And if you can do that with your family of origin, you have arrived, my friend.
Right.
You have arrived.
Yeah.
Because I returned to Pittsburgh 10 years ago, became an advocate and a caregiver at times for my mom. And let me tell you something, to individuate from a parent as an adult child while having a relationship with that parent is the only way you can truly individuate.
Wow.
And it is a job.
So I think we're also used to putting on our masks that we wear for different people in different positions and, in different places. And it becomes so automatic for us to be able to break that cycle. I just can't even imagine how you do that.
I will say there is a difference between adjusting your behavior out of respect for the person you're with versus wearing a mask. Because when I am truly myself, I curse like a sailor, Candy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? I can't even tell you. But it was clear to me at the beginning that would be disrespectful to you and the other two hosts. And so I haven't done that.
Right.
But to me, that's an adjustment, a conscious adjustment, not a mask designed to protect me.
That's such an important point. Thank you for pointing that out, because I think that you do need to understand that. And so it's not that you're not authentic in those times. Right. It's just a matter of respect for who you're with. Thank you.
The thing about this process is there is grief and mourning involved. You know, like I joke that you go through Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying when you lose your car keys.
Oh, really? Okay.
You know, you go through the denial, you go through the anger, you go through the whole cycle. Now, you may spin through it for 30 seconds a piece, as opposed to days or months or even years, if you're talking the loss of somebody that you love as a human being. But you spin through that cycle no matter what it is you lose. And so this is where the compassion and the kindness for yourself comes in, because you are going to be letting go of pieces of you that you believed you needed to have for your survival.
Right.
You need to be kind to yourself. You know, it is the emotional equivalent of losing a limb.
Sure.
Sometimes. And you're going to have phantom pains the same way someone who has had an amputation has had. You know, I call it a gravitational pull. What is the zone you've been used to living in?
Mm-hmm.
You may have changed, but you are going to have a gravitational pull to that for quite some time.
Right. And I think that's what's so important that I'm hearing also is that you'd like to take a giant leap because you'd like it all to be fixed yesterday. But that's not the way this works. And so by taking those small steps and just remembering to be kind to yourself along the way and just give yourself just the knowledge that, yeah, I'm doing the best I can today.
Exactly.
And that, you know, I'm not gonna be able to fix it in one day, but I'm gonna see that I'm moving the right direction. And even if I feel like I've taken a step backward, I can still know that I can be kind to myself and move forward.
And you may need to beat yourself up to get to that point, because you may need to go down that, I'm grabbing the nunchucks and the bats out of my brain and doing the dirty deed in order to see it.
Right.
And don't discount that as an essential piece of the process for a while, because you can't stop something you're not aware you're doing.
Got it.
But when you become aware of it, you see the pain it causes you. And now you get to make a choice, because we don't realize that we make 1 million choices in a day, and an infinitesimal percentage of them are conscious.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we're not making conscious choices. It's like, I joke about this all the time. It's like you're standing at the edge of the beach, the water's running over your toes, and the next thing you know, you're out past the buoy going, how did I get here? And then you're making a choice as to whether or not you ignore it. No judgment. We have all gone into denial about a lot of things, myself included. But it's an opportunity, if you choose to accept it as that, to see where you really are.
Okay.
You know?
Good.
And the last thing I would want to say is that everybody has the power to do this for themselves.
Okay.
Everybody. There is no reason, no matter how severe your trauma was, no matter how long it went unresolved, no matter how many things you've tried in the past that haven't worked. If you start with connection to yourself and taking the baby steps toward getting that back, remembering that Venn diagram, you know, of your false identity being intertwined with the need for safety and belonging, and your true self being pushed off to the side, baby steps to get that true identity back into that Venn diagram. And it's not going to happen overnight. And 90% of the responsibility is on your shoulders. You wouldn't blame a trainer for not looking like Heidi Klum after a month at the gym.
Right. Yeah.
You fully expect to have to put in the work to change your body.
Right. Exactly.
So why would you expect to have to do the work to change your internal life, emotionally and spiritually?
Very good. Staci B, thank you so much. It's been delightful. And you've given us so much to think about. And I'm sorry we lost Scott and Lydia along the way. But thank you for your time and thank you for your insights. And we appreciate you so much.